Hi, I'm James Powell, and I wanted to share a little bit with you about perfectionism today. I've been going to Center City Church for a little bit over a year, and have really enjoyed working in the Sozo Ministries. So I'm going to jump right into it. Don't want to take more than 10 minutes of your time. The first thing I want to talk about was just identifying whether you experience perfectionism in your life. And this is from Let Go of Perfectionism in 5 Ways by Evelyn Kim. The first would be if you find yourself highly critical of your own mistakes, or if you fail to meet certain expectations. The second would be you cannot seem to roll out a finished product or complete a project because it never seems good enough. Another one would be you spend hours obsessing over some minor detail that no one else would notice. Any of you do that? Yeah, I sometimes do that myself. You have a tendency to focus on the 20% that has gone wrong and cannot give enough credit to the 80% that is going right. And finally, you believe that you would never be perfect in the way that you look. You don't want to be caught in a photograph to make you look unflattering, for example. So can you relate to any of those? Can anyone relate to those? Okay, so if you can relate to those, you will probably struggle with perfectionism in your life. And even for those of you who cannot, it's great to understand some of the struggles of perfectionism if you're working in a Sozo type ministry in your church. I wanted to give you, by contrast, God's perspective. And God's perspective we're going to see from the book of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. It's the story of Martha and Mary. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." So here we see that God's perspective is very different from what I described earlier in terms of the perfectionistic attitudes. In fact, Jesus, he sees Martha working hard, trying to get everything prepared, and Mary is just sitting by his feet, just wanting to listen to him and relate to him. And he says that really Mary is the one who's chosen the right thing. And Martha, in fact, is in the wrong to be trying to do all of these preparations. So that really kind of gives you a good sense of what we're talking about when it comes to God's approach to perfectionism. He does not want us to do things perfectly, to run around and try to get things exactly right. He would rather us just sit and listen and absorb his wonder and his glory. So that's God's perspective. I want to share with you a little bit of my own struggles with perfectionism to hopefully get you to relate to what I see as some of the issues of perfectionism. First one is academics. Of course, I am Chinese, and Chinese people grow up with a lot of academic stress in them. A lot of their parents tend to make academics the most important thing, and that certainly was true for myself. I want to talk about specifically my MBA program that I was in California. You know, I was in a very good school, UCLA, a top 20 school, nationally ranked. Great program, great professors. But you know, I was so obsessed with getting a high GPA that I played it safe. I wanted to make sure that I got a really high GPA, as close to 4.0 as possible, because at the time I was considering going into a PhD program in business. And so I wanted to protect my chances by making sure I got a great GPA. I actually ended up getting a 3.9 GPA, but you know, there was one professor there that was really great. He was a finance professor that everybody adored. Everybody universally said he was the greatest teacher. You can learn so much from him. And I refused to take his class because I was scared. Not scared of him, but scared of getting anything less than an A or A+. And because of that fear of not being perfect, I actually lessened my own education. And I didn't get to learn from one of the greatest professors in the nation. I also had a tendency not to spend as much time with my peers, making relationships, making contacts, because I was so busy trying to do the reading, get the homework assignments done, write a great paper, And in the end, I didn't go to my PhD program. I never even applied for the PhD programs in business. I ended up going and working. So in the end, my GPA didn't matter. Nobody in the working world cared that I had a 3.9 GPA. So I did all of that sacrificing, all that perfectionistic academic thinking, and applying myself to only my academics and leaving other things behind, only to find out it didn't mean anything anyway. So I have a couple of lessons learned. One was that perfectionism is based in fear. And we don't want to live a fear-based life. We want to live a life that is fearless, without fear. And in my case, I had a fear of something, not getting into a PhD program, that didn't matter in the end anyway. I didn't even, try to apply for it. Another lesson I learned was perfectionism avoids healthy risk-taking. Sometimes taking risks is a good thing. And when you're perfectionistic, that can lead to a desire to avoid risk-taking that is healthy and that you should try to do. So I just want to kind of let you know of that as being something that I've learned about perfectionism. Is it really hurt me because I didn't take the chance to learn from a great finance professor. And I feel like I lost something from that. I wasn't able to enrich my own life because my fear of doing badly and therefore avoiding that risk of getting anything less than an A. By contrast, I did a master's in French several years later, about 8 years later, six to 7 years later. And for that program, I had a very opposite approach. I purposefully wanted to take it with a very different slant. I didn't care about my grades. I was all about the experience. I just wanted to practice my French, enjoy meeting people. I actually thought of it as like a mini vacation from my job. So I went in with that attitude and that approach. It was a summer-only program. And I had that approach. And the end result was that I made a lot of friends. I enjoyed all the quote-unquote work projects I had to do for class. I enjoyed them greatly because they were like fun for me. They weren't work for me. I got very involved in my extracurriculars, and in fact, I even found my wife, Hannah, who's probably here in the audience today, with me. I found her through this program, so it's hard to argue with. He found his wife there. So, he refuted perfectionism and therefore found his wife. What can God do for me if I reject perfectionism too? Again, went in without that attitude of having to get everything perfect, without having to feel like I had to get perfect A's, because none of that mattered to me. It was about letting all of that go. And ironically, I actually did end up with a 3.9 GPA. So I had the same GPA as my MBA program, and yet what I got out of the program was so much more rich. And that's another thing that happens with perfectionism. It can hurt your relationships with others. In this case, because I didn't pursue perfectionism, I was able to have the time, energy, effort to go ahead and form relationships in my French program. Whereas in my MBA program, I was so obsessed with doing well and getting every little essay as perfect as I could that I didn't focus on relationships. I didn't build relationships. Another struggle I've had is actually with stock investing. And I've been a stock investor since I was in my 20s. Does anybody here invest in the stock market? Okay, so you've picked individual stocks to invest in, right? Some of you? Okay. Well, hopefully this will relate to you whether you invest in stocks or not. But, I've always tried to time the market. I feel a lot of pressure to try to buy low and sell high, as they say. Meaning when the price dips low, you want to buy it so it's as cheap as possible. And of course, as the stock rises, you want to sell it at its highest point in order to make the most money, to maximize the money that you make. But what I've realized over the years is that is an absolutely impossible task. As they say in the business, you cannot time the market, meaning you cannot know when the absolute low is going to hit, and you cannot know when the absolute high is going to hit. And because of that, it was very frustrating for me, and it has been frustrating for me over the years. What happens is, because I want to be perfect and buy when it's at the very, very lowest point, but I fail to do so, or I want to sell at the very highest point and I fail to do so, there's a lot of negative self-talk. I find myself saying things like, gosh, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I buy it earlier? Or why didn't I buy it later? Or gosh, why didn't I hold on to that stock a little longer? It would have made more money if I'd waited for it to go even higher than it did. All that negative self-talk is a result of perfectionism. It's saying that I'm no good. It's putting down the self. And so that is definitely a warning. Perfectionism can be very self-consuming, very stress-inducing. The other thing that perfectionism can do is it can demand a great deal from you, but give you very little in return. And that's the case here. I was hitting myself over the head about these different decisions I'd made, but it wasn't changing anything. It didn't make a difference at all. And, there is a Bible verse that goes very well with this, which is 1 Timothy 6:6, where Paul says, godliness with contentment is great gain. And I think that concept of contentment, being content or happy with what you have, or happy with what you've done, is very important. And perfectionism tends to go against contentment. We have to always learn in our lives to be content with what we've done. It's that whole idea of being satisfied with the 80% that has gone right and not dwelling on the 20% that has gone wrong. Last example I'd like to give from my own personal life is lately I've actually started to fix houses. I fix them up and I rent them out to people who need a home to rent. And in the last one I did a few months ago, I'd made a huge list of things to do. And after I'd fix a few things, I would continue to refine my list based on other things I saw needed to get done. So it was a continually evolving, continually growing list of things to do. And after having worked on it for probably about a month and a half, I eventually started to get signs of how it was wearing on me. I was spending way too much time there. Hannah was starting to notice, my wife Hannah was starting to feel the negative effects of just not having me home very much. And eventually I had to stop because I saw, and Hannah reminded me, that it was making me full of stress, making me unpleasant to be around. It was occupying all of my time. Wasn't able to, see my kids much or even see her much. The end result was that I eventually did rent out the house, even after having stopped all my projects. And even with all of its quote-unquote imperfections, it's still rented just fine, and the renters are very happy. So in the end, I was working to be perfect in things that ultimately didn't matter at all. So that's another lesson that reiterates what we talked about. Perfection can demand a great deal from you, but give you very little in return. It can hurt relationships. It can be self-consuming and stress-inducing. Wanted to leave you with a Bible verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 to 9. And it comes from Paul talking about how he was unable to be perfect in his life. And it's kind of a model to say, being perfect is not biblical. Therefore, I'm quoting now, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. What he's saying here is, even though he strives for perfection, he knows that he cannot attain it. He had a thorn in his side, which we don't actually ever know what it is, but there was something about him that made him imperfect. And finally he realized that God was telling him it's okay to be imperfect. And that's what I want to impart on you today. It is okay to be imperfect. Now Mike and Sharon and the prayer team will be here to pray for you and hopefully break off some of those wrong thinkings about perfectionism later today. So with that, I just want to thank you for listening.